And my colleague kind of pauses and he doesn't answer immediately. And then Steve just kind of goes, don't show me something if it's not your best work.
Bob Baxley designed products at the company that set the standard everyone else is still trying to reach.
Is that unique to Apple or many companies in the Bay Area?
I've never seen another company work like that.
So
I've tried. I mean, I tried to do that at Pinterest, but it didn't really take. Apple as a company is founded on the idea that personal computing can have a transformative effect on the lives of individuals. And I choose those words carefully, like a transformative effect on the lives of individuals.
But what he learned there, he couldn't replicate anywhere else.
You literally couldn't think of how to make it better because you'd thought through every last angle. There are some big companies that have that founder who has taste and drive and desire and ambition and is trying to create something that they are proud of and put it in the marketplace. And for me, it's just as a designer, which environment do I want to work in? And clearly, I want to work in this one.
In an era where everything is powered by AI.
Like I've seen ChatGPT do some amazing stuff, and it absolutely blows me away. But it's never touched me at a human level in the same way that some of these other interactions have. And then I was like, oh, I'm in software because it's a medium, and I love this medium. So when I come to work on products, I think of them like I'm working in a medium. I don't think of software as a tool. I think of it as a medium.
Today, we're joined by Bob Baxley, one of Silicon Valley's most respected design leaders. For 35 years, Bob has shaped products used by hundreds of millions of people. At Apple, he led design for the online store during the company's leap from underdog to cultural force. He helped launch the first Apple Store mobile app and worked inside the design culture where taste, iteration, and craft defined everything. Not just what the product looked like, but how it was made. Before that, Bob helped build Yahoo Answers into one of the earliest social platforms, and later guided the design team at Pinterest through rapid scale. Today, he's the Senior Vice President of Design and Experience at ThoughtSpot and an advisor to leaders at Google, Apple, Dropbox, Atlassian, and more. What does it feel like to sit inside Apple when the most important product in modern history is being built and you don't even know it exists? In this conversation, Bob Baxley takes us inside the real Apple culture as he reflects on the moment the first iPhone appeared on stage, and how in under 40 minutes, Steve dismantled an entire industry and reset everyone's expectations of what technology could feel like. Bob also connects this to the bigger story of tech. From early PCs to the internet to AI, he sees it all as one long evolution. And he offers a simple lens for today: treat AI with curiosity, the same way he felt the first time he saw a computer come alive. Let's hear his story.
We joined Apple and 8 months before they released iPhone. So iPhone has completely changed the way people communicate and connect. And there's so many community formed because now everyone has a computer on their pocket. What does it look like for the Apple's team before iPhone just about to release?
Well, of course, when I joined the company, I had no idea the iPhone was going on. It was a very protected experience.
So you didn't know the product?
No. Nobody at Apple knew what was going on. It was just the people working on it. It was very, very secretive, like insanely secretive. And Apple at that point, and in my entire experience at Apple, it was very, very siloed. So when there would be a new product release, I worked on the online store. I didn't work on any of the products that you would buy or that you would buy a Mac to run. We had no idea what was coming out. So we would go over to Cafe Max and sit and watch WWDC or the keynotes. We would sit and watch them like every other fanboy and be like, what are we going to release today? Like we had no clue what was coming out, which was super fun actually in retrospect. Like, we didn't know what the new iPods looked like or what the new iMacs were going to be. It was super fun to have that level of surprise.
So what was your feeling when you look in the WWDC that was like the first iPhone was released?
Yeah, so the iPhone was announced at the Macworld in 2007, I think, in January 2007.
Yeah.
And then because of all the FCC regulations and all the different government checks that has to happen, that Apple had to pre-announce the product, and then it actually goes on sale like 6 months later, which was one of the few times that had happened. I think it might have been the first time in Steve's tenure at Apple that you'd had that big a gap, because usually Steve would come on stage, he would announce the new product, and by the time he got off stage, they would have completely put the product out into Apple retail stores. The website would be updated, like the whole thing would be ready to go. There was something incredibly magical and amazing that they could pull it off logistically. But the phone, there was this bigger gap. So Yeah, I remember again sitting at Cafe Max watching Steve present, watching that amazing keynote, which everybody should go watch. It's like it is the most amazing product introduction in history. There's so many great lessons for founders and leaders to take away from how he took people into that audience, and they knew something was going on. And when you walked in, like all these journalists, they all had the Palm Pilot Treo and devices like that and Blackberries and stuff, and they all think that is like state of the art. Like that just felt like Star Trek going into the Moscone with that stuff. And then 30 minutes later, Steve just makes you think that stuff's total junk. And then you end up leaving 30 or 45 minutes later with your mind just completely shifted. There's really, I don't know if there's ever been a product announcement that shifted people, that many people that quickly, that clearly. I remember some of my colleagues were at Comdex in Vegas at the time, and they were like, I feel like I went to the wrong party, you know, and that this one company could disrupt something the scale of Comdex was just phenomenal. And I remember watching Steve's announcement in real time when I first saw Pinch and Zoom. I mean, you know, when you first see Pinch and Zoom, that was very much like the first time I saw a computer. Like you watched it and you're like, wow, like it was so natural and so obvious once you saw it, but just profoundly magical because you had never seen anything like it before. One of the things I don't think Steve gets enough credit for is he's actually really funny. Like there's moments in that are just laugh out loud. I don't know if you remember at one point he crank calls Starbucks and orders 5,000 lattes or something like that. And he's just trying to show you can make a phone call with it, you know? Wow. So he calls up a nearby Starbucks in real time in front of the whole audience. Like, yes, I'd like to order 5,000 lattes. And you can hear the person on the other end kind of go, what? And he's like, I'm just messing with you. And then he hangs up, right? I mean, it's just... It's kind of a funny prank, you know, and he just did, or at one point he talks about his stylus. So we got the device and we got a stylus, you know, and he talks about, he's like, no, we didn't get a stylus. That's stupid. And he kind of throws the stylus like, you were born with the best stylus you'll ever have. It's your finger. And then he shows the finger thing. And there's a sense of fun and playfulness and levity to it all that I think actually is missing from almost all of tech today. Like I can't identify a single tech leader that I think is entertaining on stage. Craig Federighi at Apple's probably the closest. But when you think about the major CEOs, like just none of them are funny, you know? There's just no levity to any of it anymore.
As a person who has interacted and worked with him in Apple, what is your take of Steve Jobs?
Yeah, so I should be clear. I mean, so I got to present to him 4 times, which was fantastic. Every one of those meetings was very memorable for me. I ran into him in campus a couple of times, and he like held the door open for one of my candidates one time. So I have like very limited interactions with him, but all of them were phenomenal. He was always very kind to me and very welcoming. He gave us some really direct feedback on some designs now and again, but I never saw him. I was never in a room when I felt like he was getting angry. And I know all those stories kind of circulate, and those are the things people like to talk about, but that's not something I personally ever witnessed. Mm-hmm. My sense of Steve was that he took a lot of lessons from John Lennon. I think John was one of his personal heroes, Bob Dylan as well. Mm-hmm. And at least in the case of John Lennon, he just refused to be entrapped by his fame and his celebrity. And I think Steve was a little bit that way. Mm-hmm. It was very common to see him eating dinner around Palo Alto. I ran into him before he went back to Apple. I ran into him a couple of times. You would see him on campus. He would like go to Cafe Max and he would wait in line like everybody else. He'd pay for his food like everybody else. Yeah. Turns out they always had his favorite dishes waiting for him. So like when he turned up and he ordered, he didn't have to wait for them to cook it because they always had it ready for him. But of course they did. He was just, I don't know, in some ways he was kind of part of the team, I think. Mm-hmm. And you have to remember, like, he grew up. So the Infinite Loop campus where he came back to in 97 is just across Highway 85. Yeah, just across Highway 280 from where he went to high school, which is Homestead High School. And then from Homestead to his childhood home is a mile. So, you know, he just didn't go very far from Apple headquarters, from where Apple was founded and they made the Mac, to Apple headquarters, to where he grew up. It's like all within probably a square mile or 2 square miles. So I think he was, I don't know, he was just, I don't know how to describe it. He seemed to be like kind of a very humble guy in some way. Yeah, you know, he was very much of the hippie era in Silicon Valley, and he came of age in a very different time. You know, and he sort of famously said, "I don't want to be the richest guy in the cemetery." You know, and I don't know too many tech leaders today that would talk in those terms. Like it's very, there's a money dynamic to Silicon Valley that I think's really polluted the original kind of hippie vision that made Silicon Valley so special when I moved here in 1990, and that I think kind of predated certainly from where I moved. Once you got advertising, you got into the internet by 2001, 2002, like the money factor became a much bigger deal, and that really changed the tenor of what was going on here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I think, Steve is kind of fundamentally a hippie.
And a lot of his philosophy actually becomes part of Apple culture and becomes part of our
it is Apple
technology.
Culture.
Yeah. And I want to dive a little bit deeper into that, because when we remember each company, we remember by its unique culture. Like when we think about Apple, there's a particular kind of characteristic were associated with Apple product and people from Apple. And from a person who has worked in Apples for a very long time and leading problem products, how would you summarize Apple culture or Apple's, like what makes the Apple?
Yeah. So Apple doesn't have a stated vision statement that I've been able to find, but my intuition about Apple is that Apple as a company is founded on the idea that personal computing can have a transformative effect on the lives of individuals. And I choose those words carefully, like a transformative effect on the lives of individuals. It's not about companies. It's not about restructuring society. It's not about managing organizations, none of that stuff. It's about affecting people at an individual level. And I think the most Apple TV ad I ever saw was like quite a few years ago. It must have been like 2012 or something. It was a Christmas ad, and in the Christmas ad, they're playing "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas" is the background music, and it's all these shots of kind of a teenage boy with his iPhone, and he's kind of on his phone all the time, and there's all this family stuff that's going on around him. And the ad at the beginning kind of has this image like he's not really participating because he's on the phone and the family's getting frustrated with him and stuff. But then at the end of the ad, he comes back and he hooks up the Mac to the TV or something, and he plays this video. And he's been making this incredible video of the family. I'm going to get teary just thinking about it. He makes this incredible video of the family's holiday together.
Yeah.
And they kind of replay all these scenes that you've seen in the ad, but from his point of view with the phone. And it's just this incredible ad that's never really about the phone. It's about this family coming together and having the shared moment. And the phone is there as a way to kind of enhance and grow that experience. And that ad to me still seems like the heart of Apple. Like, to this day, I believe that if you took my Mac away from me, I would feel like my life was impoverished. Oddly, I think if you took my iPhone away, I think my life might actually be improved. But I don't know if that's because of the phone or because of all the software and services been built on top of the phone. But I do believe in my heart, like the Mac has made my life better, and it's made me. I don't know, it's not quite a more complete human being, but it's allowed me to be a fuller version of myself. When I was at Apple, like all the conversations, they were never about, I was, and again, it may be, I haven't been at Apple in 12 years, so I don't know what it's like today, but when I was there, we just never talked about money. It wasn't, let's do this thing on the online store because we're going to make more money. Yeah. At one point when we were redesigning the merchandising part of the store, we were looking at the product details page, there's an add to cart button. And we were trying to decide the color of the add to cart button. And we just decided that green was the color of money. And so we were going to have green. And we had like 3 or 4 different versions of the green. And it ended up going in an email chain to Steve and a couple other people. And if you were ever going to bucket test something, you would bucket test you would A/B test the color of the add to cart button. Like that is the exact place where you would try to optimize for monetization purposes. And the whole thing was just settled by an email thread. And Steve was like, Hiroki can decide. And Hiroki was the head of Marcom at the time. And Hiroki just made a taste-based judgment. Let's go with B. It's like, okay, that's it. Let's go with B.
Related to that, actually, I'm very curious your opinion, because everyone is talking about the taste is very, very important. I think the very first company that has a taste is Apple. Like the whole Apple product and design, it has a particular vibe and a taste that makes it so popular. How would you summarize that?
When I was there, the way it worked is, we as the design team would create comps, and we'd print them out on boards, or we'd make prototypes, and then we would share them with each other every 48 hours. Then we would share with our executive team every week. One of the stories I tell is that when I was on the online store for 6 years straight, the weekly rhythm would be, we'd have so my team was very small. It was, the store was doing $12 billion a year in revenue. And we had 6 designers, plus myself and a project manager. So there was 8 people on the design team working on a $12 billion a year store. Now, so in a store that ran in 30 some odd countries and had 12,500 different instances, because there's different versions of the store that run inside different companies, intranet, because there's different pricing for different companies, stuff like that. So it was like this massive e-commerce operation. We didn't have a huge catalog, but we had all these different permutations of the store, which is kind of the inverse of the Amazon problem. So Amazon only had like half a dozen versions of the store run in different countries, but then they had this massive catalog. What we would do is on Monday, we would have a team meeting. We'd talk about what was on deck for the week. All the designers would go work on their stuff. On Tuesday, we'd have a team review. It'd be the 8 of us sitting down for 2 hours, talking through all the work. How can we make it better? It's me giving direction, other people on the team suggesting ideas. On Wednesday, everybody's head down, fixing their work and making it better. On Thursday, we do another 2-hour team review, pointing out what the deficiencies are. How can we make better? How can we make this better? What's wrong with this? Then the team has the rest of Thursday afternoon and Friday morning to make it better. And then they hand off everything to me. And on Friday afternoon, we went and had a 2-hour review with the woman who ran the online store at the time, and with her staff. And so
that's very intensive processes.
Yeah.
It's like everyone rallied together.
Yeah, I sort of joke it was like Saturday Night Live, right? So we had like kind of the table read on Monday, like what sketches do we think we have? And on Tuesday, we go through a couple of them. Okay, of the dozen sketches, what are the 8 that we think are best? On Thursday, we have a dress rehearsal, and on Friday, we have a show. And we did that every week. And we did that for... we probably did that 46 weeks a year for 6 years straight.
Wow.
And you get...
Is that the way that you do the design and do the product? Is that unique to Apple or many companies in the Bay Area?
I've never seen another company work like that.
So
I've tried. I tried to do that at Pinterest, but it didn't really take. I was pushing to do that at my most recent job at ThoughtSpot, and I think we kind of got into some sort of a rhythm like that. We definitely had a culture of critique where the team was constantly showing me work, and I was giving feedback, and they were showing work to each other all the time. But we never got up to that pace that we had at Apple. It was almost. I kind of look back on that team as like we were professional athletes, right? And everybody was just used to working that fast, and you had to just turn stuff out, and nobody had more than 48 hours to go without having to show something, and they just knew they had to show something all the time. So you were in that mindset. And my understanding is that's kind of how it worked across the company. When Steve was working on any of the like the iLife suite or the iWork suite or any of the operating systems, he would have been interacting with the team. I think some of the teams maybe every week, but all the teams every 2 weeks. He had a standing review with the retail team once a week where he would go and look at the designs for the new stores. I know when they were working on OS 10 that they would build out a prototype in Macromedia Director, and they were reviewing that with Steve every week. He would give them feedback, and they would make adjustments. And it's just a different way of working. It's we are trying to make something that we're proud of, that we believe is the best thing we can make. And we're just going to keep hammering on it day by day. And we're going to be constantly showing it to other people and just grinding it out. And it's going to take however long it takes. And the goal is, for me, with all that work, the goal was always to get to a point where we couldn't think of how to make it better. Like, when you think about most people when they're working in software companies, when stuff goes out, a lot of times they're like kind of borderline embarrassed by it. Like they all know there's so many things wrong with it, but they hit some deadline and it's got to go out, or somebody's like, well, let's just put it out there and get feedback. But at Apple, it was like, no, we want to like sand off every rough edge we possibly can. And the place you were trying to get to is when you look at it, you literally couldn't think of how to make it better because you thought through every last angle.
And that's like the delicacy you have for the Apple product. Like if you have many, like the product, like Android, iOS, like Android, you see all these small bugs. And in iOS, it's like almost perfect at the time when you ship. It actually reminds me one interview I saw about Steve Jobs doing is that this story I always remember. I listened to like maybe 2 decades ago. It's like building products like have this stone putting into a kind of like a grinding machine and keep grinding until it finally become like a grit stone. It feels like that polishing. Exactly
we're just going to keep working it until it gets to the, like one of the stories that predated me was one of the guys on the online store, one of the leaders from the online store, they'd gone in to do a review with Steve, and they get to the end of the review and Steve, he doesn't quite know what to say, and he kind of looks at my colleague and he says, well, do you love it? And my colleague kind of pauses and he doesn't answer immediately, and then Steve just kind of goes, well, you should go work on it more until you love it. And that was kind of it, that story always stuck with me. Like, don't show me something if it's not your best work. Like, why would you ship something that's not your best work? And that attitude exists in maybe 2% of software companies. I mean, it bums me out. Most software companies, certainly enterprise companies, the product exists to serve sales. Right. So sales is the one telling the product what it needs to do. I think in Apple, the sales team it's the other way around. Like, we're going to make a product we believe in and that we love, and then the company's going to have to figure out how to sell it. And we're going to believe in it, and we believe the audience is going to believe in it as well, and that they're going to like it. And if they don't, we'll take our lumps in the marketplace. But we're not going to try to anticipate. We're not going to try to make something that we think the audience is going to react to. We're going to make something that we think is the best we can do.
Yeah, it's very like product driven, like focus on what is the best product. And you also mentioned that very few companies operate like this, even nowadays. Like,
I do think there's a few. I mean, we should give credit to like Linear, I think, is doing that. I think Notion is doing that.
Yes,
I think for a while, I don't know as much today, but I think Slack was doing that for a long time. I think Airbnb's tried to do that. And there's many others. I mean, there's dozens of others that we probably haven't heard of. There are some big companies that have that founder who has taste and drive and desire and ambition and is trying to create something that they are proud of and put it in the marketplace.
Exactly. Yeah, I think there's a lot of companies that, like, if you want to ship a good product, you eventually need to have that like attitude of kind of preference them. But also at the same time, there's also a company who's like, lean startup, like ship something first, ship the minimal MVPs and getting to the customer first. What is your take of these two philosophies?
Well, look, if you read through LinkedIn or you listen to especially product managers or people that talk about this, they want tech to kind of arrive at a single process and a single way of being. But tech is this gigantic thing now. And there's plenty of room for more than one school of thought. So when I look at it, it's like there are plenty of companies that are going to operate like Google and Facebook, and it's going to be very experimental based. And we're going to try to chase monetization and stuff like that. And this isn't a critique of those companies. There is a style of working that is much more experimental and MVP and things like that you just described. And that is the vast majority of companies. And that's great. Like, if you know that that's how you're operating and that's how you want to operate, those are very successful models of operation. You'll produce good products. I don't know if you produce great products. Like, I'm hard pressed to think of any great products that have come out of that process, but you certainly create great businesses. So that's fine. And then there's the other way of working where you're creating truly great products, many of which also turn into great businesses. And for me, it's just, as a designer, which environment do I want to work in? And clearly I want to work in this one, And so it's a privileged position to get to pick and choose. Not everybody has that opportunity. I'm fortunate to live in Silicon Valley, where there are more kind of true product driven companies that I could go work for. I'm really fortunate I was able to craft a career where I pretty much only worked for product driven companies. But I'm no longer in the position of trying to convince people that one is somehow morally superior than the other. The only thing I will point out is, if we just focus on Google for a second, are Google products really great? Like, they're incredibly functional and they're incredibly valuable. I don't know if I've ever used a Google product that like moved my soul. And that's not that's not the only reason for a company to exist. That's not a ding on Google. I mean, it's incredibly valuable, but that's what they're competing on, right? They're competing on functionality. So it works for them. Whereas a company like Apple, they're competing on experience and kind of that human awe a little bit.
Exactly.
And so it's at some level it's almost like a business strategy decision.
Exactly. Yeah. And it actually put in such a great way. It's really like what kind of experience or problem you want to solve. If you want to deliver experiences, I think it's like having the Apple styles of the cultures, like driving the perfect product. I think that's good. And if it's more functionality, I think experimentation, do more MVP, that type of school of thought might work better.
Yeah, look, I think Apple's in a really interesting moment with this because Apple's people forget Apple's a hardware company. Like that's what they make. And hardware has really long timelines and there's a level of precision and perfectionism in hardware that doesn't exist in software. And I think as Apple's trying to come up with more AI solutions, they're having to embrace a type of experimentation that's very unnatural for their culture. The other piece you have to keep in mind when Steve comes back in 1987, when he returns to Apple, what he's looking at is a company that's about to go out of business. Like Apple was in a very desperate spot when he comes back. And when he surveys the landscape, he's trying to compete with Dell and Compaq and these other PC manufacturers, and they're all operating on 5% margins. And so he looks at Apple, and you can either kind of race to the bottom and try to compete on 5% margins, or you can ask yourself, what can we do to get 35% margins? And the only way to get 35% margins is to invest like hell in design, and to really pour the whole company into that. And so I think he kind of very consciously and very actively said, I'm going to make design the thing that Apple's going to compete on. And then that concept just kind of gets infused through every layer of Apple. And Apple, the importance of design to Apple is existential. Like Apple has to produce great design, and everybody in the company knows that. So they all play harder, right? Like if somebody at Apple releases a bad design, they'll hear it from everybody inside Apple. Like you're letting down the whole team, and that's very different from a non-design driven company. And Tim, I think, has put his mark on Apple by making privacy an existential character trait, existential aspect of Apple. So imagine like if Apple had a data leak, how you would feel about that versus if Facebook had a data leak. Facebook has a data leak, we all go, yeah, probably it's bound to happen. If Apple has a data leak, we're all going to freak out. Like Apple's not supposed to do that. So I think both those leaders kind of set the company in different ways by making these values, whether it's privacy or design, just like infusing it at an existential level through the company.
Yeah, exactly. You mentioned a great point is about company cultures, like what things are prioritized in the company, like what is the most important thing, and eventually that also leads to marketing because that's what the company will be remembered. Like I mentioned, if Facebook leak data, we think it's probably happened like that. So it's like eventually the culture comes from internally, but also become the brand of the company through both like the product and basically everything that people see from the company. Yeah.
Well, it's what are you known for? Like it's almost like you're an individual. Like what are you known for? What's your reputation? And different companies stake their reputation on different things.
Exactly.
And by the way, like other companies are optimized to be first to market. Other companies are optimized to have incredibly robust functionality. There's
no right or wrong. It's just different styles.
I think the thing is the companies have to know who they are and what they're about, and they have to be clear with both themselves and their customers and their employees that this is what we're competing on. And where I see the most frustration is when you see like designers in particular, they go into a company thinking that design matters to the company, or maybe the company says it does, but then they don't really behave that way. And then everybody just ends up being frustrated and gets disappointed.
When did you first know computer?
That's a great story. So when I was 11 years old, I went over to my friend Glenn Wilkinson's house, and Glenn's father was an engineer at TI, and he was sort of a nerd's nerd. He'd worked on the Apollo program and things like that, and they had bought a Heathkit computer. So Heathkit was an American company where you would buy electronic devices and you would put them together yourself. And so with the Heathkit, you would have gotten like a chassis for the computer and then the board, and you had to assemble everything yourself. And it was built on the original 8088 Intel chip. And so I remember going to Glenn's house, and he had the Heathkit computer, and it's this kind of weird looking box at the end of his bedroom, and then there was this weird cable that comes to a keyboard, and I'd actually never seen a keyboard disconnected from a typewriter before, so that was a little weird. And then there was a small black and white monitor, and I'd never seen anything like that before either. And he would press buttons on the keyboard and it would change something on the screen, which this is like 1975, 76.
75?
Yeah, 75, 76.
That was before Apple.
Yeah, it's before the Apple II, before the Atari, the Amiga, all that stuff. So I mean, the Heathkit thing would have been one of the very first personal computers you could have gotten. And I remember he would press a key on the keyboard, and a letter would show up on the screen, which was cool. I'd never actually been able to affect what you'd see on a screen at that point. I mean, again, like mid 1970s. And so he'd type a few things, and that kind of made sense. And he typed something, you get some words. But then he typed something, and a whole bunch of words came out. And I had never seen anything like that before. And I remember standing there just aghast at like what had happened. It completely blew my mind. And when I reflect back on that, I obviously couldn't have recognized it at that young age, but when I reflect back on that, it's that moment when people talk about like how they fall in love with the theater, they fall in love with music, or they fall in love with movies or something. They just kind of fall in love with the medium. And for me, that was that moment. Like that's when I fell in love with the medium of computing. And then it was, my parents didn't go to college. They weren't technical people. My dad had a small manufacturing company that did metal parts. And then it turned out that a school I was going to ended up buying a Wang computer. So it was 4K of RAM and a cassette drive to store programs. And in 7th grade, I guess I would have been maybe 13, 14, we learned to program in BASIC, which BASIC is an early programming language that looks very similar to Python.
Yeah.
And BASIC just fit my head. Like computer programming just completely fit my mind. And so I just took off with it and like became far and away the best in the class. The teacher gave up trying to teach me stuff. I just sort of like ran away with the whole thing. And for 2 years, it's really kind of all I thought about and did. And that would have been 1976, 1977, something like that. And I remember going out to Mr. Micro Computer Store in Plano, Texas, to go look at the Apple II computers. And I was hoping my parents were going to buy me a 2E. They were really expensive, and we just didn't have the money at the time. But to this day, I have the brochure that I picked up, and it's got this not great looking Apple on the cover, and then the headline is the ultimate simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And I still have that brochure. And then I didn't end up getting my own computer until 1984, 85, when I was a senior in college, and bought the original Mac, the 128K Mac, which turns out that was also profoundly expensive. Like I don't think I knew how to think about it at the time, but I've gone back and done the inflation adjusted pricing of the original Mac, which I think at the time it was like $3,500, but $3,500 in 1984 is very like $20,000 today or something.
Is probably just a couple $1,000.
Yeah. It was crazy expensive. But now I remember going to the computer store at University of Texas and got the 128K Mac and the bag, and then an ImageWriter 2 printer. And then there was a set of Microsoft software you could buy. It was the Microsoft Pack, and it included File, Multiplan, and Chart, those two products would later be combined to become Excel, and then Word, and I think there might have been BASIC in there as well.
I wonder what was your impression of this product when we first heard and used it, and what was the whole society's ideas of personal computing at that time, 1970s? Yeah.
Well, so the Apple II, I was never that drawn to the Apple II because I didn't have one, and it was a command line interface. Yeah. So that wasn't a huge thing for me. My friends had like Amigas, and Radio Shack used to have a computer called the TRS-80. So there was a whole collection of these machines that came out. Apple II was maybe the premier one, but I think at the time it felt to me like the Apple II was just one of many. And if you look at the history of computing, there's this interesting moment where they were trying to decide how to market personal computers. And there was a question of, do you market them as a tool or do you market them as a toy? And they ended up marketing them as a tool because they thought that would appeal more to boys. And it turned out that men were mostly the ones that were buying computers. So the computers, when they first came out, and if you go back and you look at all the ads and stuff, actually the ads a lot of them are pretty cringy. It'll be like a guy with a couple of women around him, and they're all kind of looking in, and it's kind of this weird. I
saw some of them in Computer History Museum.
Yeah. They're actually really weird. And it was about, computing was about keeping your recipe book, or there was different games you could play, and it was just the beginning of spreadsheets. You couldn't buy that much commercial software. People would subscribe to magazines, and the magazines would have programs in them that you'd have to type into your BASIC, into a programming environment. And mostly they were written in BASIC, and so you'd have to type that stuff in, and it was all pretty rudimentary little utility type things is how we'd think about it now.
It reminds me a lot of conversation we're having now for AI. Like a lot of people say, is this a tool? Is it a productivity tool, or is it a companion?
Yeah.
I wonder, do you see any similarity among this? Is it a similar situation or different situation?
Well, I think all these things when these products show up, there is this period where society doesn't know what to do with them. And there are people that reject them and say, oh, there's no market for this. So there's a famous quote, I think, from one of the leaders of IBM who said, there was a need for 5 computers in the world and that was it. And there were plenty of people saying personal computing was a fad. And there was plenty of people that dismissed the iPhone, and there's plenty of people dismissing generative AI now. And I think I've learned to just sort of back up and sort of say, well, we don't really know what's going to happen with any of this stuff. And I know we want to characterize these things as individual trends, like the AI trend is like, that's the latest wave, and it's similar to the internet or it's similar to mobile. To me, I look at it as one big mega wave that starts with the invention of the microchip. And continues to go on now. So, you get the microchip and that leads to personal computing, and personal computing leads to networking, and that leads to the internet, and the internet leads to all these other internet services and all these different products. And then you get the smartphone, and that's the internet on the go. And then once you get that, you get big data. And once you get big data, you get cloud computing. Once you get cloud computing, you can finally have AI, and all this stuff's just building. So I don't think of AI as a separate wave from the internet or from smartphones. I just think it's the latest latest expression of this big giant mega wave of computing that starts with the invention of the microchip. And I don't know where it goes after AI. There'll be something else after that as well.
Yeah, you had a fantastic point. I can agree more. Is that a lot of us, they would say, is a wave of A, wave of B, as if the whole innovation process is a discrete process.
Yeah.
But like you mentioned, as a person, you have seen the evolution of technology for so many decades. It's a continuous spectrum.
Yeah.
And it's just keep evolving. There's like new things. They may have different names, but then it's continuous evolutions of the whole technologies.
Yeah, maybe the way to think about it's more like art. We can describe art movements, but like Impressionism is not disconnected from the Renaissance, is not disconnected from other painting periods. Like it's like music. Well, sorry, both music trends and art trends. They kind of build on top of each other because they're all influencing one another,
right.
And you can just sort of look at the overall arc. And it feels to me like computing is that way. And now, like, if you think about microchips, they've gotten into everything now. If we just look at how we're making this show right now, there's microchips everywhere in all these sound devices, video devices. I grew up in an analog world. I had to learn how to shoot on film. I went to film school. We had wind-up cameras with black and white film, and we had to like literally make cuts in them with razor blades and glue it back together. Now all that's been replaced. I grew up doing recording studios where I was in 24-track recording studios on analog machines. Now my kids sit in their bedroom with GarageBand and they have more power than those recording studios ever had. So that's just the power of microchips to get into every different corner of the economy and of the human experience and into all sorts of different tools. And nobody could have ever imagined that stuff. Like, there's plenty of us that worked at Apple that berate ourselves for selling Apple stock at some point early on. But there was no way when the iPhone came out, or even the iPhone 3 or 4, there wasn't a person on earth that was imagining how many iPhones would be sold, like how much it would change society. Like to imagine that you'd have services like Uber and Lyft and DoorDash and all the different airlines, all the different ways we'd use smartphones. There was nobody that thought that way when the phone came out.
You went into a film, like you entered the artistic track of life. Can you share us a little bit more about the journey? What getting to do a lot of fun things they're doing?
Well, look, there's a lot of types of what you might call art that are very nerdy. Like film is a very nerdy medium. And if you look at the constellation of things I was interested in as a teenager, for example, it was photography, doing, with chemistry and film and all that sort of stuff. I spent the weekends in the dark room. I wasn't one of the cool kids hanging out at parties and stuff. I was in the dark room developing negatives and, making prints because I was working for the newspaper and the annual and those sorts of things. I was into music, but I was into electronic music with synthesizers really early on. So that's like another kind of early nerdy tech thing. I was into chess. These days I'm into like Legos and baseball stats. There's sort of this constellation of things that I think fits the technical mind. And when you talk to a lot of people in tech, they have a lot of those same sort of interests. And so when I found software design, it kind of pulled all that stuff together for me. Because I'm still building worlds, because video games, same sort of, there's also video games floating around through all that stuff. And when you go into software design, there is a a piece of creative expression, but you're also having to build kind of philosophical structures. You're having to build models. You're still working in a very technical environment, and you're interacting with engineers. You have to know how the code works, things like that. So it's not like I was the arty kid like sketching in the corner. That was never me. I'm probably born to think more like an engineer who happened to end up being in UI design.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Actually, I know a lot of friends like you. They are like engineers, but like you mentioned, the art can be very geeky as well. At the end of the day, it's about figuring out unique combinations of either art or technology that is interesting and cool.
Well, certainly using technology to produce art, I think is a very kind of a nerdy thing. And a lot of art today is produced with very technological means.
Yeah, exactly.
And again, like, film, music, photography, these are all very nerdy artistic pursuits. It's not sketching and watercoloring, that's it, which those things can also be nerdy in their own way, but
Can you walk us through your journeys of how you had a journey from more software to more like product?
Yeah. So what happened is I was very into photography in high school, and then it just became clear to me that maybe I wasn't going to get too much parental support if I wanted to become a photojournalist, which was sort of the path I was on. So when I got to college, I was fishing about for majors, and film seemed like a natural thing to go into. So I ended up getting a degree in film and another one in history. And then after my undergrad degree, I was still doing music, and I was thinking, okay, maybe I could be a film composer, which was starting to weave together a couple of things. And so I ended up going to music school briefly in Boston, but it took me about 2 months to realize I just didn't want to be a musician. It wasn't a personality type that I identified with, and it just didn't fit me. And so I ended up leaving Boston and moving back to Dallas, and randomly met a guy who was a budding graphic designer. And we had the idea of starting a desktop publishing company in like 1985, 86. So this would be using Macintoshes to do graphic design, which again, in 1986 would have been a very novel thing. And so we're using like Illustrator 2.0 and then Illustrator 88 and PageMaker 2.0 on these little bitty screens, and we're using computers to do kind of low end newsletters and maps of like apartment buildings and stuff like that. But that got me into graphic design. So that was sort of another piece of knowledge now I layered into stuff. And I was on a computer all day long. So I started to understand intuitively how software works and what it means, how software is structured and what it means to be in these products for a long period of time. You pick up patterns when you're in these products for a long period of time. And I did that for about 3 or 4 years. And then I just ended up sort of not really knowing how to scale the agency and kind of bored of having to just constantly be picking up business and stuff. And I decided I wanted to get a job in tech. I wanted to get a real job. And so I sat down with a particular copy of Macworld magazine, which was like a major publication at the time, and I put the addresses of every advertiser in that particular issue into a database, and there was 107 of them. And then I sent resumes and cover letters, printed them all out. So I had to do this mail merge between my cover letter and the company name, so it would all be addressed properly, and then you had to address all the envelopes, and you had to put stamps on everything. And then I had 107 resumes and cover letters that all went into the mailbox. Like, so many Christmas cards or something. And of the 107 that went out, 2 of them came back. One of them was an interview for a job at Wang Computer, which didn't work out. And another one was for a sales job at Claris in Dallas. And I ended up getting the sales job at Claris. So I started my career actually in sales. Which there's a lot of great things about starting in sales we could talk about if you're curious. So I did that for a few months. And then one of the people that I was working with in sales had actually transferred to corporate out here in Santa Clara. And he found out that there was a UI design job that they had opened up. And I ended up applying for that and came out and interviewed the summer before I turned 27. So the summer of 1990. And in retrospect, I think I was just a really good candidate because I understood the Claris product line from having done sales and having to give all the demos. I understood the company because I'd been in the company. I had the graphic design background. I had the computer background. There was a lot of skills that I had that made me a good candidate. And they ended up hiring me to design the first version of Claris.
So that was your first UI design
That was my first. Yeah. And again, this is 1990. I mean, you could have taken every UI designer in the world and put them on a Greyhound bus. Like there's
what
just
was
weren't
the
that
UI
many people.
design look like back then? I couldn't imagine like like 1990? Was the Windows UI was?
No, it was right at the. So you would have been. This was all Mac stuff, and so it would have been Mac System 6 just before they come out with System 7 on the Mac, which was the system that was the version of the Mac system that introduced color. And System 7, I believe, I can't remember if it had 8 or 16 colors, maybe 32, but there was a set of colors that came out on System 7. So that's what was happening on the Mac. On the Windows side, I think you might have been looking at Windows 3, Windows 3.2, something like that. It was still super primitive, and certainly before Windows, 8 years before Windows 98. So, yeah, it's all pretty primitive stuff. I ended up designing, most of the work I did was in Mac Paint, and it's all very raster-based stuff. It's a lot of designing icons, designing dialog boxes. There was definitely interaction design, so you're trying to figure out how to do like print preview in Mac Project or something. And you're just, I don't know, structurally, it's not that different from what we do today. It's just a little bit more primitive. I designed the whole menuing system in ClarisWorks. There was, it was a product where you changed context based on the type of frame you were talking to. So the product could seamlessly switch between word processing, database, spreadsheet, raster graphics, vector graphics. And each time you clicked on a specific type of object, the menu bar would change out. And so figuring out what the menu needed to be in each of those different contexts was a fairly substantial information architecture problem. So that was one of the big things I worked on.
Yeah. So that's so fascinating. And I want to actually dive a little bit deeper on that topic, because when you entered your UI design career, you actually was in the transition period between the command line interfaces. Back then there was a lot of DOS. Everyone was typing. And there was a Mac, but it was like more high end, fewer people using. And later, through the Mac and through the Windows, people started to use GUI, like UI that is primarily focused on keyboard and mouse, and the whole human and computer interaction becomes very different. And as you witness these transitions, and what was your thought about the change of the UX design, like UI designs, because of these interfaces? Like, was it smooth change? Was it you have to invent like completely new philosophy of designing because this GUI thing?
Yeah, well, I never worked on command line stuff. So I have friends that worked on that stuff, like at NASA and other places. So I never had to think in the command line. I was always driven to the Mac. There was just something about the GUI that attracted me. And I should also point out that all that stuff was invented like a mile and a half from where we're sitting, up in Xerox PARC. That's where almost all those ideas. Well, Xerox PARC and SRI around the corner here.
How people figure out like the best practice of designing GUI applications in the early days?
There's definitely a lot of academic design things happening around then, like ACM, the Association for Computing Machinery, that has like SIG-Chi, like the whole SIG-Chi thing. So there's also SIGGRAPH is another one. So there was the Special Interest Group for Computer-Human Interaction, and they had an annual conference. It was a pretty big deal. And so there was many academic people writing about UI design probably throughout the 80s. That stuff's unknown to me. Like I don't know a lot about that particular era, but I did go to a couple of Chi conferences in the early 90s, and there was a lot of academics there that understood the process, mostly coming from human factors engineering.
What is a human factor engineering?
I'm not exactly sure I can tell you. But human factors, I think it's like trying to study human perception would be one thing, and then human reaction to systems. So there's a lot of academic research and different kinds of psychological research that happened around how people, how they perceive the mouse moving on the screen. So things like what the refresh rate of the screen has to be, so you view it as continuous motion. What the sampling rate of the mouse has to be, so you feel like you're in control, how humans perceive color on the screen, things like that. So I know there's a lot of research around those sorts of perceptual psychology issues. And then I'm assuming there was all sorts of research just around how humans respond to different kinds of sensory inputs and how they felt themselves in harmony with a particular system. And most of that stuff would have come out, I think it gets mostly theorized by Norbert Wiener, who'd come up with the theory of cybernetics, which was, I think it was around World War II when they started thinking about the pilot in concert with the plane. And so you started to think about these holistic systems of the person interacting with the tool. Instead of the tool existing and the person being the separate thing, you looked at the whole thing as one system. And that's the theory of cybernetics.
For a lot of people, their ideas of how the GUI or this application, how all these desktop applications show up, it's like, maybe like Steve Jobs has ideas and getting them out of
no.
But what you mentioned is actually the true picture is that there's a vibrant research community about how human and computer should interact with each other. Like all the conferences mentioned about all the researchers did research about human factor engineering, all those research and knowledge creating this condition that the Zero Park researchers will create the first mouse. And
that was actually Doug Engelbart over at SRI that invented the Mac or invented the mouse. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You're right. And then needing all this, like this is evolution processes that are coming from the research, eventually leads to the real world applications. So
I think it's there's so much history of this stuff, and a lot of these ideas go back decades and decades, and we see them when they get fully formed. Like ChatGPT, like things like LLMs had been theorized for like 50 years. People thought about neural networks for a long time, but we didn't have cloud computing enough horsepower to pull it off. So you can go back and you can read about these ideas when people were first starting to talk about them in the 50s, for example. A famous example, there's Vannevar Bush, who was President Roosevelt's science advisor during World War II. He writes this amazing article in the Atlantic magazine that comes out, I think, in the mid-50s. The article is called As We May Think, and he's describing what he called the mimics machine, which is basically a multimedia computer where you could sit down in front of a screen and you could watch videos and you could listen to music and you could read books and all that sort of stuff. And he's describing that decades before anybody's able to bring it to fruition. And if you look at like the history of the GUI and what they were trying to do at PARC when they invented the Alto computer, which was the precursor to the Mac, mostly they wanted to publish newsletters. Like that was driving so much of what Adobe was doing with PostScript, which was also invented at PARC. That's what Alan Kay was doing. That's what Larry Tesler was thinking about. That's what Stuart Brand was thinking about. Like the whole thing of personal computing that got invented within a few miles of where we are now. A lot of that is people wanted to publish newsletters.
I didn't know newsletter is so important.
I mean, think about if you didn't have newsletters. I mean, that, like being able to publish your own thoughts in a meaningful way is the driver of Web 2.0. I mean, that's the genesis of Twitter and Facebook and like we all comment sections. Like we all want to get our ideas out there. So it's not. To me, it doesn't sound crazy that people would want to create their own newsletter and try to find a way to get around the guardrails of the established media.
Exactly. Yeah. I think it's like the need for people to communicate to a lot of people. I want to dive back a little bit to your own career. So you now landed on your UI design careers. What happened next?
Well, I was at Claris for about 4 years, worked on a bunch of products, and then it was time to move on. I ended up consulting for about 5 or 6 years and just sort of drifted around Silicon Valley, working for a variety of different companies. I was at Apple before Steve came back, so I worked a little bit on the Newton. I worked some of the stuff that was in some network connectors in the OS, did a couple of small projects for Adobe. And during that period, I was kind of a one-man agency, and that was a period in time when it was much easier to do that sort of stuff. And the benefit of that period, in retrospect, was I worked at a lot of different companies, saw a lot of different cultures, worked on a lot of different projects in a lot of different mediums. So I worked on Windows software, I worked on Mac software, I worked on TV-based systems, I worked on primitive mobile stuff, I worked on websites, desktop apps, kiosks. Like it was just a whole big collection of different types of human-computer interaction experiences. And I think from that, in retrospect, what I learned was how people and machines interact, like what that exchange is like. And so I compare it to people who are linguists versus people who are fluent in a particular language. So there are people who know how to speak French, and there's people who are linguists that understand how languages are structured. And so I think that period of being able to work on so many different projects so quickly transitioned me over to a linguist. So I believe I do have a unique understanding of how humans and machines interact. And I notice things that other people wouldn't notice, which sets me apart a little bit from designers who maybe only work on mobile or only work on websites or something. I ended up moving over to Yahoo, where I led the design team that worked on all the Yahoo search properties around 2000. That was like 2004, 2005, when Yahoo at least believed they were still competitive with Google. It was the number one website on the web. And our search technology was really solid. Google had had a lot of other benefits, and Google played their cards, I think, better than Yahoo in a lot of ways. But the main thing I worked on there was Yahoo Answers, which was a super fun product. It's sort of it's a question and answer community site. So it's probably the first expression of a real social media site that I can think of. Predates Quora by a pretty good stretch. That was a fascinating experience working on that. And then there was a job at Apple that opened up to go lead the team that worked on the Apple online store. And I took that, and we could talk about the reasons for that. But I ended up going over to Apple in 2006, I think it was. So about 9 months before the iPhone was announced. And then I was at Apple for 8 years and left around the time, I think it was the iPhone 8 came out, which was around the time I left.
From your perspective, what are the key things people need to keep in mind when they design Q&A systems?
A lot of it has to do with credibility and like what your sources were. When we were working on answers, it was just a different thing because it was more of a social media site, right? So you would post a question, then you'd have to wait for a period of time for people to respond. And the way answers worked is the question was open for a certain period of time, and then the community could vote on what the best answer was. And then after some period of time passed, I think it was like 2 weeks, the question and answer pair would get locked up, and it would be like, oh, that is knowledge. And so I think the impetus for the product team that was creating that is they were trying to, well, for one, I think they were trying to create a bunch of web pages so they could have just more stuff to crawl and do better on SEO. But I think they were also trying to provide some sort of meaningful nugget of knowledge. And they were trying to like tie down specific answers to specific questions. A lot of the problems we were working on was trying to figure out how to keep bad actors from abusing the system, how to convey to the questioner that which one was the best answer, trying to make sure the voting system was working right. It was obviously a massive graphic design problem. We also struggled with how to position what the product did in people's heads. So one of the main things we did is we had 3 big boxes on the homepage that said ask, answer, discover. And so there was a place where you could ask a question, a place where you could find questions to answer, and then a place where you could just browse. And I think that sort of triad of verbs, ask, answer, discover, was really powerful for helping position the product. And that was something we stole directly from Apple with the iPod, or I guess it was iTunes. Rip, Mix, Burn was one of the popular campaigns at the time. So I think with a lot of these products, and you see it with ChatGPT now, it's very hard to explain what they do. In ChatGPT, I think part of the issue is there's so many things that it can do that there's no way to kind of tie that together into a small statement that says this is what you can use it for. So it's very hard for people to figure out how to fit it into their routine. It's very hard for you to build expectations about what the product can do.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing you mentioned actually I feel so interesting is that because you were talking about Yahoo Answers back then, it is Q&A, but it's designed very like a community, human community. And now people are solving the problem, but now they're talking as a chatbot, like AI which answers the questions immediately. Like people are keeping solving the same problem with a different technology in the internet.
Yeah.
The technology that you can connect a lot of people together. Now people want to find information. Now the solution for that is to create a community. So the community answers the question. Now with the AI, it's the same problem. People want to get information. Now, instead of creating community, like have the AI to answer the questions for that. And that changed the way the design works and how the product look like.
Well, look, I'd also say in AI that you're still getting an answer from the community. The community is just much bigger now. The community is the internet, right? Yeah. I think a ChatGPT is, a lens onto the hive mind of humanity. You don't have like an individual on the other side answering. I haven't thought about Yahoo Answers in a long time, so I want to go back there for a second. When the product first launched into beta, I came home and I was explaining it to my kids, and my kids were pretty young at the time, like maybe 5 and 7, something like that. Yeah. And what I did was very abstract. I mean, even to this day, most people in my life don't understand what UI design is. And so I was trying to explain to my kids and my son in particular what the product actually did. And I said, well, like, what kind of question do you have? And he asked, where did dragons come from? He was trying to understand why every culture around the world has this myth of dragons. And so we posted the question in Yahoo Answers, and then we had dinner. And by the time we'd finished dinner, there was like 5 answers waiting for us. And the answers were from human beings, and they identified what they were, and who they were and where they lived and stuff. And I remember one of the answers, the guy was like a paleontologist or something, and it was like, oh, basically, the myth of dragons showed up because people around the world were digging up dinosaur bones, and they were trying to figure out how to explain them. And I don't know if that's the right answer, but there was something really powerful about being able to post this question, and then have dinner, 90 minutes later, come back, and there's been half a dozen people from around the world interact with it. There was something incredible about that.
Yeah.
That ChatGPT's or Google, any of these automated systems, there's a certain magic to them as well, but it's not that magic. It's not that human to human magic.
Yeah, it's something happening in the real world. There's like a real human that is contributing this, contributing the answers, and you are connecting to.
Yeah. It feels like it must be like that thrill of a message in a bottle type thing, right? I'm sitting on this island and I'm just going to throw my message out there, and then like somehow it comes back to you and you get an answer sometime later. And there was something very meaningful about that. Like I've seen ChatGPT do some amazing stuff, and it absolutely blows me away, but it's never touched me at a human level in the same way that some of these other interactions have. Like I had a blog early on, and I remember I had a post about why there's not why every Disney family there was only one parent present. And if you look at most of the Pixar movies, if you look at most of the Disney movies, there's only one parent around.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And most of them, not all of them, but most of them. And so I just kind of had this, I wrote this little blog post about that. Yeah. And one of the people that chimed in was a former animator at Disney. And he said, we always start with two parents, but it turns out after a while in the script, like you don't know what to do with one of them. So you just get rid of them. It was a very pragmatic storytelling type issue with having two parents around. And I just remember that interaction. It was like amazing that I was able to post something and then it kind of bounces back and this person who was at Disney was able to respond. Like that's
amazing.
That's absolute magic.
I also want you to discuss more about what happens after Apple. So you worked at Apple for 8.5 years?
Yeah, for about 8 years.
And then you decided to explore the world out of Apple. Tell us more. Yeah.
Well, I had moved from the Apple online store over to Apple retail, and I was working on the corporate side of Apple retail on some of the software they use inside the stores, and had an amazing 2 years working on Apple retail. Apple retail was an absolutely astonishing organization. It opened me up to a whole different way of understanding how restaurants work and theme parks work and retail stores work. I mean, it added a lot of extra colors to my rainbow. My time in Apple retail was phenomenal. But the reality was, for me personally, at that point in my life, I was having a lot of trouble transitioning from Apple, the underdog, to Apple, the big dog. And I just needed, Steve had passed by then, and I just needed to go someplace else. And so I ended up leaving Apple and going and running design at Pinterest for about 1.5 years. And part of going to Pinterest is I wanted to understand what was happening with all the Web 2.0 excitement up in San Francisco at the time, because I went there in 2014, which would have been, like within 1 square mile, you had Twitter and Uber and Lyft and Airbnb and Slack and Pinterest and probably some others I can't remember. None of them had gone public yet. They were all a big deal. So it was a very interesting time to be in San Francisco and to kind of see that whole thing that was happening. My time at Pinterest was kind of productive. I think I had some good impact there. It ended up not being a great fit for me culturally. And so, as one of my colleagues said, I just sort of bounced off the culture and I left Pinterest after about 1.5 years. I definitely learned a lot about transitioning from a very specific and strong corporate culture like at Apple. So people, when they're in a really strong corporate culture in Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, these are all very specific ways of being. And you leave those places, and if you take your behaviors from those places into your next company, it's probably not going to go very well. And so I think in retrospect, the biggest mistake I made at Pinterest was I think they hired me for my Apple values, and what they got was my Apple behaviors. And my Apple behaviors, for example, going back to that really intense weekly review cycle, that's just not something they were set up for. That wasn't where they were coming from culturally. And so I come in trying to just force that down everybody's throat, and it just didn't go well. And so I think for me, a lot of my learnings at Pinterest was to try to transition. When you go to a new company, you have to take a beat and you have to kind of understand the culture and you have to figure out how to fit into that culture. And you know this as as an immigrant coming from China to the United States, you can't just show up in the United States and be Chinese. Like you kind of you got to adjust a little bit. Yeah. And I think for executives in particular, that can be really challenging because when you get hired into a new role, it's typically because there's some sort of crisis going on, and there is an expectation that you come in and you fix things really quickly. And so it's not uncommon, I think, that people show up and they just immediately try to take action. And in reality, you sort of just need to chill and like look around and kind of observe and take note of where you are and then adjust your behaviors accordingly without giving up on your values. So Pinterest for a while, and then left Pinterest. And then it was around 2016. And frankly, I became very disillusioned with tech. I spent a lot of time driving up 101 and talking to friends and design leaders in other companies and just sort of wondering like what the hell had happened to this place. It had drifted so far from the hippie ethos that I had first fallen in love with in 1990 to the sort of this crazy money-driven cultural influence manipulation type thing by 2017, 18. And then I ended up listening to a podcast that's produced by Stanford called Raw Data. Through the process of going back and studying the history of Silicon Valley, I rediscovered that hippie ethos, and it really galvanized for me what I love so much about Silicon Valley. And there was one particular part that really grabbed me, and it was a quote from a book called From Counterculture to Cyberculture, and it's talking about the rise of personal computing. And the quote is I'm paraphrasing, but the quote is basically, you have to ask yourself why it is that personal computing got started in Northern California in the late 1960s, when at the time, every tech company in the country was on the East Coast. Right. And the answer is there was a very small group of people in and around Stanford University who saw computing as a new form of media on par with movies, music, and books. And so once I heard that, I was like, oh, crap, like that's the through line here. Like I'm actually a maker. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Yeah. I'm actually a maker. And I felt that when I was in high school and I was a photographer. I felt it when I was a filmmaker in college. I felt it when I went to music school, when I had a graphic design company. Like just all these things. I was always trying to be a maker. And it wasn't until I got to Claris in 1990 that I finally found my medium. You know? And then I was like, oh, I'm in software because it's a medium and I love this medium and I need to find other places that celebrate the medium the way that I do. And I came to believe and strongly believe that it is a medium definitely on par with movies, music, and books. Like I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that software in my lifetime has had a way bigger impact on culture around the world than anything that's been related with movies, music, and books, with all due respect to those industries. Like software just blows them out of the water in terms of cultural impact. So when I come to work on products, I think of them I'm working in a medium. I don't think of software as a tool. I think of it as a medium, and that puts me in opposition with the vast majority of companies. But I'm also kind of okay with that because there's still enough company. I mean, I can only work at one company at a time. An entire career, you're going to work maybe at a dozen companies tops, probably less. You know, so it's not like you have to find 1,000 of these companies. You just need to find a few, and you need to be thoughtful about finding them. And fortunately, I think because of generative AI, and it's becoming so easy to create products that people are realizing that design is the thing that's going to make their company different and maybe the only true competitive differentiator. So I think design is starting to have kind of a moment. We'll see if that actually plays out, but I'm hopeful.
Yeah, you mentioned such a fascinating point. It's like software is a medium, and it also ties back to what you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation about. In the 1980s, people were figuring out what is personal computing. Is it a tool? Is it a toy? Yeah. But any technology, was starting the tool, but they will have a long-lasting impact more than tool. Yeah. In these cases, is conveying information, influence people's behavior, just exactly like what a film or the movie or the book will influence. Yeah. Over time, we realize it's a media, it's a toy, it's a companion. It's changing us. It's a medium.
Oh, yeah.
So
in a way that's way more insidious than film. For example, if we look at movies, you can watch a movie and still kind of keep a distance from it. Like to watch Star Wars, for example, you don't have to become part of Star Wars. You can just watch Star Wars. But I'm not picking on any companies, but I'm just going to use Facebook for a minute. Once you go into Facebook, you have bought into the idea of Facebook. Like once you decide to view Facebook, you have to become part of Facebook. You have to buy into all those mental models. You have to buy into the idea that a friend is somebody that has a database record in the social graph. Like, you have to understand what a news feed is and how you can constantly keep going. You have to buy into the idea that all these updates kind of matter or something. There's just a lot of concepts that you have to buy into and become part of in order to use the software. And so I think software manipulates users purposely and unpurposely in ways that's very different from what movies, music, and books can do.
The tools and technologies is going to have an impact on us, the way we perceive the world, the way we behave. And I know that you are very conscious about the impact of technology to us as a society. And we talk about the internet and how this tool is going to help. And we're also in the AI era. How would this AI will as a media, I think by the extension, software as a media, AI is also a media. How this new media will impact us as a society?
I don't want to sound like I'm just I try to be a realist about this. I'm not a techno optimist. I'm not a techno pessimist. I'm just trying to be realist about it. And I can't think of any examples where we regulated technology before a lot of damage was done. Like we didn't regulate cigarettes before a lot of people died from them. We didn't regulate social media, and we still haven't regulated social media. We don't regulate things until societies happen after the emergency. And so I don't see us getting ahead of AI and regulating it in any meaningful way. I think we should. I think it would be great if we did. I just don't think human society is going to pull that off. And so I say that with some sadness, but I just try to be realistic about it. And I'm glad there's people that don't believe that and are going to push on it and try to do some things. I just don't have any examples of us having done that in the past. So I'm a little skeptical. I think we will, as we've done with all these other technologies, I think we'll figure out some way to muddle through. It won't be some golden era after AI gets established, but it probably won't be some horrible dystopia either. So the way I think about AI, I was talking to a group about this the other day, is people are very skeptical about AI because your mental model of AI comes from Hollywood. And in all the sci-fi movies, whether it's 2001 or The Terminator or whatever, like you see AI as this very malevolent, human destroying technology, but that's just a made up thing from Hollywood. That's not necessarily what AI has to be. And so in my own work, I've tried to think about AI as another form of intelligence. Like it's statistics and pattern recognition, whatever, but it's some form of intelligence in the same way that maybe an octopus is a type of intelligence. And so to me, it's like when I get to talk to ChatGPT, that's like talking to an octopus, which like that mindset is like super interesting. It's like, well, crap, I get to talk to an octopus. Like, how cool is that? Yes. And so I try to approach AI more with a sense of wonder and curiosity, I guess mostly like when it says stuff to me, I'm kind of like, why? I'm like, I'm not giving myself over to it. I mean, like an octopus can't tell me how to live my life. Like ChatGPT is not going to tell me how to live my life, but it can point out some things and it can observe things that I might otherwise miss. So in either my stuff where I'm using it very purposely and consciously as a life coach. I use it as a thought partner on different different postings I might do. Or I'm working on a deck for a presentation right now. I'm using it for some things there, and I find it to be an amazing companion, editor kind of companion, thought partner on some of that stuff. But I would never just give myself over to it.
Yes. You mentioned such an interesting ways to understand the relationship for the AI, like an octopus. We treat it as a different species. That actually gave me a lot of interesting thoughts about that. Like the way you interact with AI, if you think about, this is how you will interact with octopus or some animal with intelligence, like dogs were already interacting, that will fundamentally change the way we interact, like we treat them as equal parties in the relationships. Another question I would love to get your idea is about, a lot of people talk about language-based UI, like the ChatGPT, everything is chatbot now. What is your take about the impact of this AI on the design?
This is a very hot topic in the UI community. Everybody's convinced that the chat-based things are going to go away. That can't be the final expression of AI. And like, I don't know. Maybe not. Like, the chat-based thing seems to be working now. Talking to AI either verbally or through text seems like a very natural way to interact. I haven't seen too many other models of people using a blurring AI and a GUI. My personal sense is that's probably where we end up. That you use AI to do coarse-grained things, and we're talking about like generative stuff. Like if you want to generate a photograph or something, can you use a chat-based environment to create the original image, but then you can quickly dive into the GUI and make adjustments, but then go back to the chatbot and have the chatbot know the adjustments you made and then be able to make changes on top of it. So I don't think the GUI stuff's going away. I don't think the phone's going away. I don't have too many. There's not too many examples in history where a new technology completely eliminated an old technology. Mostly what happens is new technologies come out and they force the old technologies to get more specific. So,
that's a great mental model.
Radios didn't replace newspapers.
Exactly.
Movies didn't replace radio. Movies didn't replace, or TV didn't replace movies. The internet didn't replace TV. Everything just gets more specific. And so I don't think the chatbot thing goes away, but we may over time figure out that it's good for these things and not good for these other things. And we just haven't worked it out yet. We're just in a period of massive experimentation. And I don't see there's nobody out there that's describing exactly what it should be that we all recognize and say, oh, that's what it should do. There might be some people squirreling away inside different companies. Maybe there's some group of 10 people inside Apple that are figuring this all out, and they're going to have another iPhone reveal type moment. Well, it's going to be a small group of people. Like there's also... I think you also have to wonder, when people are looking at what everybody else is doing, are you able to stay in your own thoughts long enough to be able to produce something completely different? Or are you constantly reaching out and seeing what others is doing, which is constantly watering down your own ideas?
Exactly.
That's a different thread. But if you go back and you look at the iPhone, so the iPhone was invented by 24 people. That's 24 people on the patent. The Mac was 20 people. It's 20 people, involved in that team. They're very, very small teams. So maybe there's a small group of people somewhere that's figuring out what the future of AI is going to look like, and it's going to be a big reveal. But
like you mentioned, we are still in the era of experimentation. It's like the 1970s when the computer just come out. There's these keys that everyone's playing. What exactly that leads to? What is the best way people interact with the equipment? You mentioned about that early time it was typing and then some numbers show up. At that point, people wouldn't imagine there would be GUI showing up, mouse, and all the games and all other applications down the road. So we are kind of like back to the 1970s. Like, that's an interesting thing. There's a chatbot, but is that a final thing? I think 5 years or 10 years from now, and we will see a big, more clear pattern.
Yeah. I mean, you see it in natural history as well. If you go back and you study stuff like the Cambrian explosion, where you have this plethora of new forms of life show up all of a sudden on Earth. And then there's just all these random species with all kinds of really interesting and different forms. And it's just this period of intense experimentation and innovation by nature that then results in a lot of the life forms we see today. So these periods of intent, and you see it in art too, like the Impressionists were obviously a big explosion. If you look in New York City in the late 1970s, early 80s, when you've got Jean-Michel Basquiat, and you've got Keith Haring and Andy Warhol and David Hockney. You got Talking Heads, B50 or Blondie. You've got there's like an art movement that's happening there, and there's just a lot of experimentation happening in a very short period of time. And I think you're seeing the same thing with AI now. I mean, there's so many startups in Silicon Valley. There's so many people running different experiments. Thousands upon thousands upon thousands of them. Like, we'll see what emerges.
A lot of audiences are also doing that. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. So looking back at your 35 years of careers and experience, you have seen a lot of different patterns, amazing products, and amazing careers and jobs. What would be the one thing you will go to tell a younger version of yourself?
The thing that has served me best is trying to make stuff that I'm proud of. Just try to create something that you truly believe is your best work and that you think is doing good in the world, and something that you can take. The way I kind of describe it is, we're all makers. Like all of us in the room here, we're all makers. Everybody watching this at home is a maker. And I believe in my heart that the number one thing that motivates a maker is they want to create something cool, and they want to take it home and show it to their parents and say, look at what I made at school with my friends today. That is the number one thing that I think drives all of us. And I just hope and wish that people would hold on to that, that childlike desire to create something that is meaningful and useful and powerful to you.
Exactly. Yeah. Create something we are proud of.
Yeah.
That's well said. And we are all makers.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining the show and sharing your life story and wisdom. It's
my pleasure.
incredibly helpful, and I learned a ton today.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
This is great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching the full interview. If you got value from this conversation, please drop a comment, and subscribe to FounderCoHo. We've got more founder insights and deep dive interviews coming your way, so don't miss them. See you in the next one.